we do have some more folks talking. Catherine, Spring, I don't know how up to date on all of the moving parts you both are. But in our schedule, we were supposed to have Ramona next, and we've decided to save that for a later date when there's more information and knowledge available about the power of attorney paperwork that we have coming forward.
Okay.
And we also, in the next half hour at 3:30 Pacific time, we were supposed to have Aaron and Jeff with us for a comedy skit, but unfortunately that had to be canceled because crypt stuff comes up. We have needs, we have bodies, and you know, we work with them, and sometimes we work a little bit around them.
Yeah.
So, is Peter? Okay, anyway, sorry. Doing two things at once is not always the best. So we had the idea from Gabrielle to have a bit of a discussion about some of the tweets and comments and conversations happening over on Twitter and bringing them over here. Oh, we do have a question for Peter if he's still here and is able to join us once more.
Okay.
Peter. Yeah. Just to bring you back into our Twitter conversation, because this question does come from Twitter. Ghostbird asked, regarding sterilization, the difficult topic that it is, and its recent history of being performed non-consensually on both disabled and particularly First Nations peoples, relates to Bill C-7. So the sterilization that you've helped to fight against, how it relates to Bill C-7 and how it does or doesn't resemble the two. Have any thoughts on that?
How it does relate, or how it does.
Yes.
How it does is it's somebody else's wants the say, or somebody else is in control of the decision. Yeah, that's what I need to say. Somebody else is in control of the decision, not the
Absolutely.
person. Whereas it should be, in my way of thinking, and I'm going way back, it's the person that's in control of their own body, not somebody else. That's not someone else in control.
Peter, can I just ask, does it say something though also about, you know, the fact that people with intellectual disabilities, and we had laws in the country that provided for sterilizing people against their will. We now have a law that says, you know, we can terminate the lives of people with intellectual disabilities if they say they're suffering, even though they're not dying. Does that, like, is there something about the message? Is the message to society sort of similar, do you think? I was just wondering.
To be honest, I never thought about it before, but yes, it is similar.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really, I guess, is a really powerful question. I really.
It's so it's scary. It's so similar.
Yeah, yeah, it is scary.
Definitely. Thank you, Peter. If you two both have the time, and obviously if you don't, or if you need to duck away for anything else, please do so. But if you two have the time and want to join us for Twitter questions for the next while, I think that would be really valuable to continue having your input as we talk about things. Do you think that would work well, Catherine?
Sorry, you've seen how long it takes me to get to my mute button. Yes, absolutely. If Peter, if we haven't worn you out with all of our questions, you feel like staying around for a while?
Well, you know me, Catherine. I work well with questions.
That's the spirit. Thank you, Peter.
Amazing.
Can
Well,
I
thank
ask?
you.
Can I ask Peter one more question while you're looking through the Twitter feed? Peter, right now, especially during the pandemic, you know, you talked about Zoom and how it's not perfect. Are computers available to many of the people that you have worked with? I mean, is that a barrier in itself?
There's a program here in Ontario called Passport, and they're allowing for funding to purchase your computer and a person to work with you so that you can learn your computer and your to pay for your internet connection. So yeah, at least there are a lot more computers out there than there used to be.
Wow. So that would be interesting to hear from people who are watching or listening from outside of Ontario to see if there are programs like that in the other parts of the country.
So I know that exists in Ontario only, that particular program.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something good to look into. A lot of the Twitter conversation, I think, especially because of Gabrielle's thoughts at the beginning of our previous hour about poverty and class. So a lot of the Twitter conversation has been about that, from what I'm seeing. And Peter, I don't know how informed you are or kind of in the loop about disability rates in BC.
No, I'm not informed of disability rates in BC, but
yeah, you're not here.
I know Ontario.
Yeah, Ontario's is I would say comparatively low. I mean, it's low across all of Canada, right? So in BC, we recently had an increase, and I use quotes because it was not very much of an increase, and it still keeps us in poverty. But we did have an increase from the government, and a lot of disabled people that are on the disability rates are quite understandably upset, myself included, because as I said, it keeps us in poverty still, and it does not do anything to support us after this government just passed C7. Do you want to share any thoughts on maybe the Ontario disability rates or anything related to disability and income assistance?
Well, the Ontario rates keep people in poverty, and there was a whole 3-cent raise, or maybe it was 4, I've forgotten which, last month. Big deal. That's even right now is costing more for groceries than it did before the pandemic. Really, this is making it very difficult for anybody to, whether you're not in poverty or whether you are in poverty, it's making it a very difficult period.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say there's similar feelings for sure in British Columbia. Disabled people being asked to exist on, it's not much more than half the poverty level, the poverty line. We know from other Twitter information and just conversation on Twitter about people feeling just so disheartened because of that poverty piece, the poverty. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I think groceries, that's honestly really important because in BC, I'm not altogether up to date on the rest of Canadian income assistance and what happened during COVID. But in BC, at least, we were given a $300 supplement at one point last year. And that still keeps us below the poverty line by quite a bit. But a lot of people started saying that they could finally afford to buy groceries enough to last the whole month.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning they weren't able to do that before those $300 were added. So people were going without food or accessing the food bank or other resources like that because they just didn't have enough money for groceries for the whole month. Especially with rent so expensive in a lot of places. Staying mindful of ability today, but I'm getting a lot of DMs in my chat right now. But do you want to maybe?
I can. We'll finish your thought and then I can add.
G suggested that you read the comments that won't be part of the CBC broadcast.
Yeah, I can do that.
Maybe do that.
Absolutely. And then I also have a message from that I can read at some point. I just got a message from, I don't know, those of you who were on the filibuster panel, what was it, a week ago or more? We had a guest, I had a guest on the hour-long panel that I hosted, and her name was Monica. And she sent a message with some comments, so I can also, I could read that message into. Let me look for Gabrielle's words.
Absolutely.
They are here. If we would like to do that right now, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I think it will definitely be relevant to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is a piece that Gabrielle wrote for potentially for CBC Radio. And it says, hello, my name is Gabrielle Peters, and I'm a disabled and poor woman. When Bill C7 is given royal assent, I will be among the class of humans for whom assisted suicide can be medical advice suggested to me by a healthcare professional for non-life-threatening and non-life-ending health issues in Canada. If you're not disabled, no matter how much you suffer in life, death will not be an option suggested to you unless you meet the reasonably foreseeable death criteria. Even before Bill C7, I have had healthcare professionals tell me I would be better off dead. I was pressured to sign a DNR at one of the lowest points in my life. My partner of several years was leaving me, and I hadn't worked for some time and was ineligible for disability benefits because of his income. So I had $0 to my name and was about to lose my home. I was also in the hospital. And now the people who were supposed to go to the mattress to fight for my life were instead wishing me dead. I don't understand why you'd want to even go on living, said the healthcare professional at my bedside. Another time, a doctor suggested I go home and wait to suffocate to death alone. This was the option he offered me when told he expected I would soon require a BiPAP, and I told him I did not wish to move to a nursing home. Despite being promised the right to that choice in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Canada ratified, he informed me I had no such right. Perhaps if I had family or sufficient income to pay for the care I would require. But disabled and poor and in need of certain supports is a snake square that sends you straight to long-term care, no matter your age. One could even call the criteria that a disabled person be told about, not provided with, the supports available to live before made. The supports available to, sorry, I'm going to start that sentence again. One could even call the criteria that a disabled person be told about, but not provided with, the supports available to live before MAID is approved, to be deliberately cruel. The reality is many of the supports disabled people need either are not funded and therefore don't exist, or only exist for wealthy disabled people, a small group indeed. Both of these incidents happened years ago prior to the legalization of MAID in Canada, and neither of these violated any laws as far as I know. Things have not improved since. Roger Foley wants to live and he wants to live at home. Denied the supports necessary to do so, he has recorded the hospital staff suggesting he avail himself of MAID. Chris Gladders was a disabled man who decided rather than remain in urine-soaked sheets he'd been left in for weeks beside the feces on the floor of the long-term care facility, he would choose MAID. 18 months before his death by MAID, Archie Rowland was transferred against his will from a residence that provided highly specialized care to a long-term care facility where the staff were not trained to communicate with him and provide essential care. Before he died from MAID, he told a newspaper it was not his illness that he was tired of, it was the fight to get decent care that exhausted him to live. Devoted dad Sean Taggart wanted to stay in his home, but Vancouver Coastal Health refused to fund the proper amount of home care he required, and he faced the choice of MAID or moving to a facility 4 hours away from his son. The choice he faced was existing in a place that took away his reason for living or allowing the doctors to kill him. The shameful list is longer than this broadcast will allow. It's a flat-out lie to suggest these people wanted MAID. UN experts sent a 7-page letter to the Canadian government suggesting Bill C-7 violates the UN's CRPD by creating a 2-tier health care system, one for non-disabled people and another for disabled people. Whereas non-disabled people get suicide prevention, disabled people are given suicide assistance. They questioned whether free choice can exist and asked the federal government to answer 3 questions. And we're still waiting for the answers.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to spend a bit of time speaking to that statement from G? Catherine, maybe you want to join in a bit of a conversation about that, because I think it was really valuable and there's a lot in there.
Yeah, there is a lot in there. I think that maybe the best place to start, although there's so much to unpack in all those stories, maybe I'll say first, I mean, you know, these names, Chris Gladders, Roger Foley, Sean Taggart, Archie Rowland, these are real people. These just aren't statistics. And these stories only come to us almost by fluke. I mean, luckily, Roger Foley is still alive and among us to tell his own story. The other 3 are all gone. And they, fortunately for all of us, there was a record left of their struggle. a record left either in the testimony of a sibling. In Chris Gladder's case, his brother was so shocked and traumatized by the conditions that he discovered that his brother was living in when he submitted to MAID, that he went to the press and found a journalist who was willing to run the story, to investigate, and to report on it. Same with Archie Rowland. I mean, Archie Rowland had advanced ALS. He wrote with eye tracking, which anyone who knows advanced disability technology is a very laborious letter by letter movement of your eye and your glasses. They have to be just perfectly aligned on your head because you can't move your head. You can only move your eyes, and your glasses have to be lined up perfectly with your computer. And you type that, letter by letter, character by character. And he was living in an institution where the nurses didn't even know that his glasses had any significance at all. And they couldn't make sense of what he was asking for. And when his mother tried to demand better treatment, she was forbidden from coming into the hospital because they said she was being abusive to the staff. She was defending her son. And Archie somehow managed to write letters to the administration of the hospital. And he was an educated man. He had been a landscape architect. He was able to express himself well, laboriously, painstakingly, with the last days of his life, writing these letters that he copied to a Montreal Gazette reporter. Charlie Fiedelman, I think was his name. And that reporter, thank goodness, picked up the story and reported it. My point is, and the same with Sean Taggart. He had a Facebook page. He had a supportive online Facebook group that he corresponded with. And he told his story to his friends. And, I take from all of these stories the incredible abuse that Gabrielle has named. I take also the lesson that these are just the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. These are the handful of stories that break through all of the barriers, all of the forces that silence us, and that are especially pernicious to people who do not have the means, the economic means, the power, the basic income, the basic means of authority and autonomy to express their insistence for better conditions of living. I take from those stories one more lesson. For all of us, I think, that we have a duty to help record and report those stories and to make it as accessible and possible as we can, and to not insist that the stories be written in perfect prose or that we even totally believe them. We have to hear them. We have to report them. We have to put them on record.
Yep. I think something that I first thought when Emile Joseph was speaking back at the round table, and have kept thinking throughout Peter's time with us on on our broadcast here, and again now while you were speaking, Catherine, about how the institutionalization of disabled people, the barring us from spaces through structural or societal inaccessibility, all of these things have created the perfect conditions for us to not be heard, for us to not be followed and understood and included, and how events like this, like last week's filibuster, even support groups on Facebook and Twitter and other online platforms, the kind of advent of blogs. A lot of disabled people have blogs. I think a lot of those are places of agency for us. A lot of us can't get into post-secondary institutions like university, college, etc., due to, again, all kinds of ableism, and then you get into systemic racism and classism and misogyny. And yeah, so we put our thoughts in these other mediums, and we have to hope that they're valued for what they are, for the history that they are recording. And like, I have a lot of faith in disabled people organizing. I think we can do some really big things. I mean, historically, we already have, and I think that will just continue. But I also hope that non-disabled people look at these places of record as an ongoing and growing archive of sorts for disabled thought and public record of what we're saying. We're saying no to C7 by and large. So much of our community is saying no to this, and I hope non-disabled scholars and laymen alike like really dig into that and question themselves and their complicit nature if they're not fighting with us.
Yep. Yep, it's true. And I mean, you know, I think it just, you know, one of the things, it underscores for me what Peter was saying about how there have been some maybe modest efforts to make internet and computers available to people with disabilities in order to tell their story and in order to find and flourish within their community, because otherwise these days you're totally isolated. So what I was going to say is that, you know, there are some of us, and many of us have been quite visible in this filibuster, some of us who have been able to write to parliamentarians, meet with senators, argue with politicians, form cases that go to court, and those are all, you know, acts of activism. But it's also an act of activism, I think, to provide computers and internet to people who need it. I mean, there are many, many ways to support the struggle, and when people who want to be allies understand how important it is for us to create that record. And it's going to be very significant in the years ahead as we engage more with the UN. Because, you know, as I expect we will discuss on some future broadcast, the possibility of a systemic inquiry into what is happening in Canada will require evidence, and these stories are part of that evidence. I mean, to me, they are the heart of that evidence,
Mhm.
that people with disabilities who don't otherwise have access to expensive technologies and even basic internet have got to have that as for their own protection and for their own well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know folks engage in mutual aid. A lot of mutual aid happens on Twitter, where we joke about passing around the same $5 for some of us. But mutual aid has always also happened in the streets, in communities struggling to connect with one another, and absolutely fighting for computer access, for internet, is a really big element, I think, moving forward. I think a lot of times people don't recognize it as an actual need in modern society. But, you know, most homeless people that I know, most unhoused people that I know, are like, no, I need my cell phone. I need to be able to access Wi-Fi networks. I need to be able to stay in contact with people. And that goes absolutely true for disabled people and people isolated at home as well. Connection is important.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Sean Taggart, sorry, Springer, let you jump in a minute, but just because I don't remember things more than 30 seconds. Sean Taggart, one of the things he said, and because he had to have extensive technology, and he said, technology is my cure. Like, that is what I need to function autonomously and to live a human life. And, you know, it's not all about my body, it's about how I express myself and how I keep, you know, how I keep contact with the people who matter to me. And, you know, in seeing in that way, I mean, it is a life or death matter for people to be able to remain connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, Spring.
No, not at all. That's a really, really interesting point that you just made. And I completely agree. My injury happened about 15 years ago, and that was right when people started to have smartphones. And my smartphone, I mean, we can complain all we want about being dependent on technology, but my smartphone is how I function in life. All of my, you know, I just think about when my first injury happened, I was still writing down addresses in a book. And I was still, you know, if someone made an appointment, I would write it in my book, or I would, and I physically, that was very, very difficult for me to do because my fingers don't work. Like to have a pen or even to have one on hand somewhere that I can reach it, like just as you all, you know, all the people that are listening are aware of the, you know, the barriers to just doing sometimes very simple things. So that my phone for me is literally how I've been able to do so much of the things that I do in my life, just by having all of that information available right there at all times. It's also my safety. So technology is huge. And it just sort of a funny little thing to add to that is much less sort of, my life doesn't depend on it, but I recently bought myself an automatic jar opener off of Amazon for, I don't know, 25 bucks. And this is an amazing piece of technology. You set it on the top of a jar, you push a button, and it opens your jar. And the reason I say that is, I mean, I just get this delight every time I watch it open a jar for me. But I think that has a lot to do with tech. The availability of that device has a lot to do with technology and connectedness in the world. Because 15 years ago, when I first had my injury, and I think there's still many things that are like this, you would have to order a device like that through some sort of medical supply company, and it would be prescribed, and it would be, you know, big and probably not well designed, and it would cost $500. And so the accessibility of simple things to make, I mean, they're designed for everyone, right? This jar opener isn't specifically, I don't know, maybe we're probably getting off topic, but it is just an empowering tool that, I mean, it's so simple and sort of funny in this context, but that availability of having access to whatever the technology is, whether it's a smartphone or voice control, or being able to, you know, type with your eyes or open a jar, or the jar opener is available to me simply because it's not being marketed directly to disabled people. It's available just on the open, you know, I ordered off Amazon. So I look forward to the day when, or maybe we need to, that's one of the conversations to be had, is the gatekeeping around technology for disabled people, and the cost associated with it, and the barriers to accessing it, which I've had many conversations with people about. You know, I have a friend who has a traumatic brain injury, and he has quite a lot of difficulty speaking. And I'm sure there is technology that would be useful for him, but he has not been able to access it. And that means he can't communicate freely with people, and I worry about it all the time. So I just, you know, that's, if you can't communicate with with your group or your people, it affects your quality of life. When it's difficult, it changes how you live in the world. So I agree, technology is very important and very powerful, and I would love to see everyone be able to access whatever technology they need to be able to live their lives.
Yeah, I agree, Spring, totally. I mean, obviously, look at me, I'm surrounded by technology. But, you know, and you're right, it deeply affects our quality of life. It also, the absence of technology, not being provided with technology, not even imagining that you could ever have the technology that you need, it eats away at your will to live. And in the Bill C7 era, that is what we really have to watch for. I mean, I remember when I was on the external panel, it was a panel that was set up to advise the federal government about how to respond to the Carter decision. Of course, there was no advice taken in the end, but we had people coming and testifying before us, and there was a woman who was a proponent for assisted death, and, you know, she gave this really impassioned testimony, as many do, and I remember she said at one point, "I can't even call my granddaughter." And I thought, I wanted to take her aside and say, look at this device. You can call your granddaughter, you can call 911, you can call, you know, a chat group, whatever, with this little device. And I don't think anyone had ever told her about that. Now, these are the people who are going to be assessing her request to die and her suffering, and determining her eligibility for medically assisted death. I find it horrifying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's such a strange. I'm not sure what the word is. Just such a strange context to exist in, that is so difficult to access.
Difficult and expensive.
Yeah, difficult and expensive, usually both.
Yep.
And you're absolutely right there, that can make all the difference. I was speaking to another friend who she uses a wheelchair, and she actually is, you know, fortunate enough to have a vehicle that's adapted so she can drive. But she recently got a new wheelchair, and she just was telling me last night that despite having ordered it through with the support of an OT, and through obviously through a you know, professional wheelchair vendor, and despite having emphasized repeatedly that this new wheelchair needed to be the same size as her previous one so that it would fit in her vehicle, it does not fit in her car.
Right. Perfect.
Yep.
And so here is this person with, you know, she's quite a privileged person, you know, on the grand scale of things, having access to things like her own vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, you know, I don't know where the error happened. I don't know, but there's just this barrier. So now she owns a vehicle that she can't use.
Can't use. Wow.
And now there'll be some sort of a, you know, I don't know how this is going to go, whether she's going to be able to send her chair back. I've not heard of that happening very often, but
Yeah.
it was someone's mistake, and who is going to sort of, you know, have to bear the consequences of that mistake? Most likely it will be my friend.
Yep.
And that's just such an issue, such a problem.
I go back to something that Joe Carglin, a friend of mine, said, and he said, human rights for people with disabilities are the only human rights that come with a budget, right? I mean, we can have our human rights as long as it doesn't cost the state too much to fulfill them. And that's part of the ableist construction of our very understanding of human rights.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to add two things, and I have the first one, and we'll see if I remember the second one. The first one is a comment from Terry Bell Arts on Twitter, and they tweeted this a while ago, but it's very relevant right now to the conversation, which is someone that was speaking had said, how do we unseat this as in ableism? And this person tweeting from this account said, we build our own better tables, accessibility as the default always and in all ways. And yeah, I think it's always relevant to what we've been saying this whole time, but especially right now. I think disabled-led solutions are the way to go, because otherwise it's just, they're not, non-disabled people don't know what's available to us or even what we need in the first place. And if they do know these things, they're not consistently communicating them to us. So often we have to do that communication within community. We have to tell each other, hey, this is the doctor that you want to see for that. Ask to get a referral here. This is probably like your best bet in terms of mobility aid. Ask for this referral and see if that works for you. I have the same thing as you. This is what I've done to solve it, etc. And we're coming up with all kinds of solutions that non-disabled professionals never bring to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much more complex than the professionals make it out to be.
Yes.
But we have so many more answers than they relay to us as well.
Yes. Yeah, so true. Yeah.
Do you remember number 2?
I don't.
Fair. That is fair.
Yeah. I have thought of a different second thing, so I'll say that now. But when you were talking about like who foots the bill when a mistake happens, we see all of these horror stories, and non-disabled people and people who don't use wheelchairs in general are often shocked and horrified at the reality. But when we are able to travel, which is not all of the time, just because of poverty or even getting on the plane or the bus, but when we are able to access that kind of travel, I don't know the percentage, but it feels like more than half the time our wheelchairs or our mobility aids are broken.
Yeah.
And it is a whole fight, and it requires public advocacy online and in the news for us to not have to pay for our repairs out of our own pocket.
Yeah.
The amount of disabled people that I've seen on Twitter alone, and I'm sure this happens even more on Facebook and Instagram, saying, hey, this airline broke my wheelchair. Hey, don't use this airline. They have broken my wheelchair every time I've traveled with them. Like, it's kind of just the open secret within disability community, which airlines to travel with and which ones to avoid, because of that. And yeah, that's another thing, is these people that are handling our mobility aids just don't know how to handle our mobility aids. They try to fold things in half where they shouldn't be folded. They throw things that shouldn't be thrown. And it comes back to just a lack of disabled people being in community for long enough that this is just common knowledge. Like, I think that's where I keep coming back to, is these things should just be common knowledge in society. Like, you should know, I mean, to just ask if a wheelchair folds in half, and if it doesn't, then don't bother trying. Because I've seen 2 occasions where someone has tried to fold a power wheelchair that should not be folded, and they've broken it. Like, so yeah, that is a thought that came to mind about who foots the bill and where is this societal knowledge really lacking in terms of disability and actually having us in community.
I think we could relate this whole conversation that we're talking about right now back to the idea of the deeply held belief systems, like societal, I mean, it is ableism, deeply held ableism in society. One of the things that I've observed, and I've talked to many people who have agreed, and it, you know, in multiple ways and through multiple avenues. But when we talk about access to travel or to military mobility devices, or you know,
military devices.
Yeah. One of my things that I've noticed is it seems like, I mean, I can think of specific times, and I can think of many other times where less specifically, but my suspicion is there just seems like there's a different sort of I'm trying the words, I'm not coming up with the right word, but around what a disabled person can expect as far as sort of like customer service, timeliness, respect. It seems to be, appears to be to me a little bit different standard than there are for non-disabled people. And as an example, I could use, I had to get, because of airline damage, my wheelchair, I had to have the arms replaced on my wheelchair. In this case, I actually had really good, the airline itself was very helpful, but the vendor, the dealer that I used was very difficult. And it took months, almost a year, to finally have, and they, you know, this is a bill that's being paid, so you'd think that they would just do it. So I sent my wheelchair after months and months and months of going back and forth, and I sent my wheelchair to the shop. Finally, they had their it was organized for them to do the work on my wheelchair, and they took it and they had it for the morning or whatever. And when they brought it back, they just delivered it. They just dropped it off at the front door. I was in my bed because I didn't have a wheelchair, so I didn't see it. And they just dropped it off, and my attendant she brought it in after they left. She brought it into the room for me, and I could see that the arms were not replaced with similar arms that had been on before. They were entirely different arms. And it was just really, I thought, in my mind, I made the parallel, like if I took my bike into the bike shop, because I used to be a mountain biker, to get the handlebars replaced, and the shop wasn't able to replace them with the ones I requested or were the same ones that were already on the bike, there would be a conversation. There would be a call that would say, oh, we're having trouble finding this part. Maybe you should come in and look at what we've got, and you can pick which one you think would be the best, or we can, there would be a conversation, and that would be a decision that I would be a part of. And in this case, I was just expected to just, like, it wasn't even worth mentioning to me, because, and so I guess I just relate that in some ways to, the way the senators and the MPs relate to disability, in just that kind of, you have to be happy for what you get, be grateful for whatever we're willing to provide for you, because that's what you get. So I think, again, back to that idea of how we are able to, really assert our agency, like Paul said earlier.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. My head's just kind of exploding with all the dimensions of this problem, because when something outrageous happens to a non-disabled consumer, if they know how to sort of mobilize and get their story out on Twitter or whatever, get it in front of, I don't know, a TV show that does investigations, there's an impact ultimately on the provider who has screwed up, right? They get shamed, they get boycotted, they get they get humiliated, and their bottom line suffers, and so they respond. Often they respond, quickly, because they can see what might explode in their faces. When it happens to us, we don't have that kind of consumer power. We really don't, and we can be very good about communicating to each other. Stay away from this vendor. Stay away from this transportation carrier. But A, the transportation carriers are probably happy if we stay away from them. And B, and I think really pointing to a systemic problem, the vendors of our equipment, they have bigger customers. They deal with institutions, and they can make, their bottom line is barely affected by whether we shop at their outlet or someone else's. But their market is the institutions. So it's all, and who run the institutions? Well, it's not us. So the deck is just stacked against us in many ways that are deeply systemic, and it's another problem. It's invisible. Yeah, it's another problem with institutions among many problems.
I think Spring had something from G.
Yeah, just give us 1 second here. We're kind of wrapping it up.
No
if that's
problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think just while Spring is doing that, to go back to Gabrielle's piece, I think it's really powerful how she ends that piece by reminding everybody that the special rapporteurs and UN experts were very specific in their questions to the government of Canada. And as she says, we're still waiting for an answer. You've gone ahead and you've passed Bill C7. You are not answering the very specific questions and very detailed questions that have been laid out to you by the international human rights authorities. And why is that? How come we're letting, not us, but how come your loyal voters are letting you get away with that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I keep going back to that too. How I don't understand how we can just disregard that. Yeah, it's really,
Yep.
really, really frustrating.
Yeah.
For sure.
One more thought before, and then if things with G are sorted and organized, then we can hear her thoughts. But one more thought from me. It's been interesting. I alluded to this slightly earlier and during this last week's filibuster, but I have never had faith in our government system. I think that's true for a lot of people, both involved in this and not. My life experiences have made me very skeptical of their commitment to the lives of disabled people and trans people. And so what I keep coming back to is that if I'm going through this, as much confusion and disappointment as I am already, having not expected them to care or represent me, I can't even imagine the level of disappointment and betrayal from people who have previously felt represented by government officials and have not felt like they had to take direct action to have their lives fulfilled and meaningful and represented on a political level. So yeah, again, I think that this connection for disability community, and this, I hesitate to use the word because sometimes it has negative connotations depending on your political affiliations, but I think that radicalization is a good thing in this regard. I think that we can all be radicalized by current politics and events. And I really hate when I can't remember the originator of a quote, because I always like to name the people I get my knowledge from. So if someone else knows the person I'm quoting, but the quote, "Let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair," is something I hold deeply throughout all of this.
Yeah.
I've just been going back and forth with G about her comment that she really wants to add, and it's so hard to not have her be able to be directly part of this. It really is, would be that much richer. But we're just, she was hearing us talk about our problems with accessing the things that we need. And as part of her statement to the Senate, she told the story of her cushion. And I don't know how many of you heard that story or have heard it, but I'll try to tell it as best I can. Because what it does is it shows, we can talk about, oh, this person who's got a car and her new wheelchair doesn't fit in it, or this person whose wheelchair got broken by the airline. But when you add poverty to that story, it adds in just like it's multiplied to the nth degree. The barriers are so many more and so much harder to navigate. So the story that she told to try to sort of communicate that to the senators was she uses a wheelchair. and of course she sits on a cushion. And she noticed one day when she was transferring out of her chair that her cushion was saturated, was heavy. And like many people who have disabilities, she suffers, or not suffers, I'm not going to use that word, but she deals with incontinence from time to time. So what she realized was that the cushion had some sort of an opening or a hole or a crack in the cover, so that the foam inside had become saturated with urine. And so there she was left with a cushion that is saturated, and of course will smell badly, and it's impossible to clean because it's not meant to be cleaned on the inside. And so what that means for her is that in order to get a new cushion, because if she was someone who could just call up and order one, well, it would be at her doorstep probably within a week or maybe less. But she would now have to go through the steps of contacting, and I am not sure exactly the steps, but I think you first have to contact the ministry, who would then contact an OT, who would then contact you to come and do an assessment to see whether you really in fact do need a new cushion, which are, steps that could easily be eliminated because it's not hard to discover whether you need a new cushion or not. And then that OT would decide what new cushion you were allowed to get and order, and then that OT would put an order in to some vendor who would then order in the cushion, hopefully at some point. And each of those steps could have a month in between easily. And so that means that as a disabled woman, she is using this, this not pleasant, this very unpleasant cushion for months because of the red tape and the steps and the gatekeeping in just providing something that is clearly something that she needs. And I would even add an observation of my own to that story, is that when we talk about stigma and people feeling uncomfortable sometimes, I would just say that having to go out amongst people, potentially to do your job or to use transit, when you're using a cushion that doesn't smell good, does not help with that. It's not helpful. So it is a profoundly different experience when you are poor, when you're dependent on all these levels of system to assess and decide what you do or do not need in order to just live your life.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a really, really important thing to always be aware of, particularly for some of us who happen to have access to more financial resources than others. And often it just is, life works differently. But it's easy to lose sight of that whole other, I would say, multiple layers that poor people have to navigate and be patient about. And so I think that's a really important story.
I also want to highlight something that G just said in the chat a few minutes ago that I think is really important and relates to what we were saying earlier, was there's, as you were relaying for her, there's no agency when you're poor. And additionally, consumerism and capitalism won't save us from that. As much as sometimes we might hope that it will, or sometimes it'll make things easier for some of us for brief moments. At the end of the day, colonial capitalism is often at the root of all of these things, and we have to be in struggle with the whole of it, as difficult as that is.
Yes, the system, and rather than trying to work within the system. We have to fight the system itself. It's tempting because the system is powerful and huge and overrides everything, but it is actually the problem.
Yeah, keeping her alive. Yeah, what I'm always trying to balance, and I think all of the other organizers in my life as well, is keeping each other alive within the system while ultimately fighting the power of the system. And it's a very complex balancing act that we don't always get right.
Yeah.
And it does, I mean, just to refer back to where we started today, I think it does remind us, just as Senator McCallum's remarks reminded us, that this is part of a much, as big as this struggle feels, it is part of a much bigger struggle with so many peoples who have been harmed deeply by colonialism and all of its spawn.
Yep.
Very much.
That does bring us to the end of that hour. Again, things go by so quickly.